good old, yeah, get a good old look at it. Secret ingredient. Okay, take 3. Hey everyone, welcome to the first episode of You're Invited. I'm Leah Hughes, and today we're gonna make chocolate chip cookies, and I'm gonna show you a recipe for how to make chocolate chip cookies and also a little trick that will make it so that you can serve fresh homemade chocolate chip cookies to your guests anytime they come over without any preparation. If you don't want to make homemade chocolate chip cookies, but you like the idea of a tip, just skip ahead like 10 minutes, and I will show you how to do the homemade chocolate chip cookie trick with store-bought dough. This feels so fitting for the first episode that we're doing because chocolate chip cookies is actually the first recipe that I ever developed. I was 16 and a junior in high school, and there was this woman that made these really dope chocolate chip cookies, and all she would do was sell them, which, I mean, anytime you want a chocolate chip cookie, you don't have all this extra money to just buy chocolate chip cookies when you're in high school. And she wouldn't share the recipe, and it really bothered me. So I set out on a quest to make my own version, and I honestly think mine turned out a little bit better. These are all the ingredients that we need for the chocolate chip cookies. So to start, we've got room temperature butter. Pull it out like, the morning that you're gonna make them or 30 minutes before. Room temperature butter is better than melted butter when you're making chocolate chip cookies because melted butter tends to make the butter or make the cookie spread a little bit. But I will say we're gonna stick them in the fridge at the end to help the butter kind of harden back harden back up, and so it's not that huge of a deal. I like doing cutting up a bar of chocolate instead of using chocolate chips here. You'll see why when we break open the cookie at the end of the episode. But one of the best parts is that there's just like teeny, tiny little pieces, and it melts into the cookie and it just gets so good. We've got baking soda and baking powder, vanilla, eggs, brown sugar, and white sugar. I purposefully haven't measured out the flour because I'm gonna show you a little trick, or not really a trick, I just wanna show you how I measure flour because depending on the way that you do it, you can get a very different amount of flour. And then our secret ingredient, this is when I was like, oh, I found that girl's recipe. Instant vanilla pudding. This is what it is. Get a good old, get a good old look at it. Secret ingredient. So we're gonna be putting this in there as well. I think that's everything. We'll start by doing our wet ingredients first. So what that is the eggs and the butter and the sugar, because those beat for a longer amount of time. And then once you beat, specifically the butter and the sugar, once you beat that all together very nicely, that's when you kind of start to fold the other ingredients in, and you don't want those to go for as long. So we're gonna add in our sugar here. And I'm using a KitchenAid stand mixer with the paddle attachment. The paddle attachment is pretty much what I use for everything. Now we're going to add, this is 2 sticks. Technically it's in 1 container, but it says on the front 2 sticks of butter, 1 cup of butter. However you get there, it does not matter. So you want to cream the butter and sugar together for actually kind of a long time. I learned this from Christina Tossi, the girl that owns Milk Bar. She came on the Today Show, and she said that when the butter and the sugar cream together, they create like air pockets, and that's what makes the cookie nice and chewy. So we want to do that together for a long time. While that's beating, we're gonna do the dry mixture, the flour mixture. The flour, the way that we do flour is I don't know why I'm saying the way I do it is I spoon it in and then level it. I don't know, I feel like I've read in a lot of dessert and cookbooks that this is one of the most accurate ways is to really measure it out on a scale, but we're gonna do it this way. 1. Okay, so 2 1/4 cups of butter, spooned and leveled. And then we're gonna do 1/2 teaspoon of salt. This is diamond crystal salt, which is important because it's not as salty as like that Morton salt. And then we're gonna do a teaspoon of baking soda and a teaspoon of baking powder. Baking soda is gonna make the cookie chewy, and baking powder is going to make the cookie rise up a little bit more. If you just use baking powder, it would turn into a little bit more of a cakey cookie, which is fine. Some people like that, but we want one that's chewy with also a little bit of height to it. All right, now I'm just mixing up the, oh, I almost forgot. My handy dandy vanilla instant pudding. I'm just gonna take a spatula and scrape the sides down a little bit just to make sure it all gets evenly incorporated. And I'm gonna add my eggs. I cracked my eggs into a little bowl first just to make sure that no shells got in. And then I'm adding in 2 teaspoons of vanilla. I love vanilla, so I'm going heavy here. If you're not as big of a vanilla girl or guy, because the instant vanilla pudding was vanilla, then you could always do 1 teaspoon instead of 2. We're gonna make sure that gets all nice and mixed together before we add in the dry mixture. Okay, once that's all incorporated, we're gonna just pour a little bit of this at a time and then put it down, just because sometimes if you do too much of it, there's a big old cloud of flour that comes up and gets everywhere. But you don't want to beat this too much. The flour, or like the dry mixture, should be not beaten nearly as much as the wet mixture. It has something, oh shoot, see, that's why you do it in batches, people. It has something to do with like the gluten and I don't know, something like that. All I know is Christina Tossi says don't do it, so I'm listening to her because she makes really good desserts. Now, lastly, we are going to fold in the chocolate chips. And oops, I poured them all, but I'm gonna save a few and I will show you why at the end. Okay, so we're just gonna get these all mixed in. You can still see a little bit of flour, that's totally fine because, like I said, you don't really wanna overwork it at this point. All right, sticking this in the fridge for like 30 minutes. It hasn't been quite 30 minutes, but we have to work around our baby's nap schedule, and he is quietly eating Ritz crackers and mozzarella cheese in the background. Once these come out of the fridge, really all you're doing is just hardening them up. You get some pretty heavy tablespoons and plop them like this. If you have an ice cream scoop, that would work great. I don't have one. I do think though that these are turn out more delicious if you do bigger cookies because they'll get thick in the middle and kind of crunchy on the outside, and it's just better. Unfortunately, because we're making such large cookies, it means you can't cook as many on your baking sheet at a time. But when we talk about our little trick in a second, that will be a-okay. I think I can fit like one more on here. Okay, so earlier, actually I'm gonna do 2 more. Earlier, if you remember, I kept out some chocolate chips And the reason that I did that is because what we're gonna do is take a few pieces of these chocolate chips and just stick them on the top where they don't already have chocolate chips at the top. And this just makes for a more aesthetically pleasing cookie that has like chunks of chocolate at the very top. It makes it look all nice and yummy, just like that. I'm gonna put another big piece right here. Yeah, we've got some good commentary now coming in. Okay, I'm gonna stick these in the oven for, I mean, everyone's oven is different, so like don't take this to heart. You really wanna watch these and look for these to be nice and golden brown on the outside. If they look a little doughy in the middle, that's okay. They'll get a little bit more dense as they cool, and they're a really chewy cookie, so they're meant to be a little bit like that. I think we'll put this in for about 12 minutes, in my oven at least, at 350 degrees. We pulled them out of the oven. I wanted to show you my final tip for just making these chocolate chip cookies so good. Maldon sea salt. Clearly we use this a lot because we have a giant tube of it. If you don't use this, you should. It's just like flaky, amazing sea salt. And so what you're gonna do, and you do this while it's hot because you kind of want some of the salt to like melt into the cookie, but you're just going to drizzle, or sprinkle actually is probably a better word, each cookie pretty generously with salt, just because it really helps cut the sweetness of the cookie. All right, so now we're gonna let those cool, and we're gonna put them on a serving plate to eat. Yummy, yummy, yummy. Okay, once these have cooled, you're just going to serve them up on a platter. Doesn't have to be anything fancy because the star of the show is these cookies. No one is going to be looking at the kind of plate that you're serving them on. They're so perfect and like crispy on the outside and soft on the inside. Look at that perfection. Okay, so those are baking, and I told you I would tell you about a little trick on how to serve warm, fresh chocolate chip cookies anytime people come over or anytime you want one without having to do anything. My mom always did this. If I ever was like, came home from college and I was like craving some like homemade chocolate chip cookies, she'd be like, yeah, sure, I'll get these for you. And they would be ready within like 10 minutes. And I was like, how are you doing this? Found out she was making chocolate chip cookies like in a batch like this, and then taking them, and instead of putting them in the oven like we just did, she was sticking them in the freezer. And so we're still putting them on a sheet pan like this, just because if we were to directly put them in a Ziploc bag, then they would all kind of like stick and clump together. We need to get them a little cold first, and then we'll transfer them to a Ziploc bag. And I know we talked earlier about the roll of like Pillsbury or Nestle cookie dough. You can totally do this same thing. I did that here. This is Nestle or Pillsbury cookie dough, and I put them in on a sheet pan, froze them, and then transferred them to a Ziploc bag just like this. You can do the same thing with store-bought dough or using your homemade recipe that we made. All right, I'm gonna stick these in the freezer. It only takes like, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes for them to kind of get cold enough to where we are gonna transfer them to the Ziploc bag. Enjoy!